Together, as 1,000 individuals and families that care about and care enough to invest in our community, the community foundations and our donors have a huge positive impact on Memphis and the Mid-South, measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars. While most grants made through the Community Foundation are advised by the people and organizations who establish private funds here, for the past 30 years, the Forever Funds, through the investment of donors like you and the guidance of community volunteers, have addressed the most pressing needs in our community and supported the creation of innovative, transformative solutions in West Tennessee, Eastern Arkansas, and Northern Mississippi. So forums like this one also inform the decisions of our community volunteers, as well as driving positive collective impact through the Forever Funds. And you'll be hearing more about the Forever Funds in the months ahead as we appeal to really build up that endowment for our community-based grant making. And when anyone looks at Memphis in the Mid-South, the focus invariably turns to the persistence of poverty in our community. Memphis continues to suffer from some of the highest rates of poverty of any major city, as I'm sure we all know. And poverty, as we will see, impacts so many other factors in our community: economic growth, neighborhood development, individual health and wellness outcomes, and of course, public safety. Tonight, you'll hear from some of the strongest voices in our community in addressing the issues which are affected and shaped by poverty in our community. The presentation, I know, will be informative, and we will try to make this as interactive as possible. And it's also important for you to know that this is going to set the stage for a number of donor forums and site visits and other opportunities that we'll be arranging throughout the year related to this important topic. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Elena Delavega. Dr. Delavega is a professor in the University of Memphis School of Social Work, where her teaching and research focus on poverty and social welfare policy. She'll introduce our panelists and jump right into the presentation. So without further ado, Dr. Delavega, the floor is yours.
Good evening, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, wonderful. Tonight we have a really wonderful panel composed of Arnetta, Stanton, Macklin, and she's the Chief Advocacy Officer of MIFA, and I do apologize. Advocacy is just one word that, as a Mexican, I have never been able to pronounce correctly. She is a Memphian who's been doing good work for Memphis for many years because she cares. She is a fourth-generation Memphian who works and worships in the poorest zip code in Memphis because she cares about our community, and leading Memphis, MIFA, is how she expresses it. There is a lot more about her wonderful bio that you can see in the little card. I'm not going to read the little card, but I'm honored. Then I would like to introduce Roshun Austin, who is the president and CEO of The Works and a true advocate for so many things, so much economic development in Memphis. We have intersected many, many times, but housing is such an important issue, and I know of nobody who has done more for creating affordable housing for Memphis than Roshun. So thank you. And then I would like to introduce Dr. Pedro Velasquez-Mieyer, who comes all the way from Venezuela, who came to us through Harvard because one of his children got sick with cancer. And this community gave his child's life back to him. So he wants to give back, he wants to contribute to the health and well-being of Memphians out of gratitude, and loves our community also. And so everybody here loves our community, loves Memphis, but every time we look at the numbers of poverty for Memphis, we have to feel discouraged. And just a reminder, the Memphis poverty fact sheet for this year has, I'm going to talk about the Metropolitan statistical area. When we look at the city of Memphis, the poverty rates are higher. But the MSA that has 1.3 million people, poverty rate is really, really high at 16.9%. That's second highest in the nation. But when we look at poverty for children, particularly African American children, is 32%. Now compare that to poverty for white children, and that's 5.6%. So not only is poverty really, really high here, it is also very unequal. And so we have this tremendous disparity. When we look at poverty in general, we're the second poorest large metropolitan area in the country. But when we look at African American poverty alone, it goes higher. When we look at white poverty alone, we fall to 28th place. When we look at the city itself and compared to other cities, white poverty falls to 17th place. That should give us pause and get us to think a little bit about what's happening and the disparities that we continue to experience. I can talk about the numbers for hours. I can tell you about poverty among people over 65, which is 10% nationwide, but 20% in Memphis. One of the things that is truly disturbing is that a lot of the older adults are women, are African American women. And those African American women they were employed. You know, when women joined the labor force in the 70s, African American women had been in the labor force forever. But they were never enrolled in Social Security. So today, we have such high poverty rate among African American women who are older because they're not receiving the benefits that they clearly earned because they were working. So those are some of the policy issues. But again, I could talk for hours about this, and I don't want to talk. I want to hear our panelists. So I'm going to ask everybody the same question. Given that poverty is an intractable problem in Memphis, and when we look over time, we see that, yeah, we go up one year, we go down the next, we go up, we go down. But overall, it just continues. It's the same. So the question that I have for you is, why? What's driving this poverty in Memphis? And I'm going to give you maybe a couple of minutes each so we can answer other questions. So Arnetta.
Good evening, and thank you to the Community Foundation for leading this courageous conversation. I believe the answer is because we're dealing with generational versus situational poverty. Generational poverty because generations, there has been inequity as well as an opportunity for economic segregation. Generational poverty because if a person is born into poverty as a child, they're more likely to oftentimes have a child that's in poverty, and that continues the cycle. Instead of having that hands up and that hands out and that cushion, persons in generational poverty actually are giving a crutch. And in addition to that, there's hopelessness. And this hopelessness oftentimes feeds into what is called a poverty mindset. And also, as opposed to thriving, people in generational poverty are simply surviving. And it also has to do with not having access to basic human rights and needs, such as food and housing. And I think that has actually expanded the wealth gap here in Memphis. And I believe that the pandemic has actually made that even widen and increase the disparity that we have here.
I don't know.
Thank you
So,
so much. Yeah, very helpful.
so hopefully you all can hear me. And I saw my pastor walk in, so I have to behave. Maybe he knows better. I don't. I like to approach this a different way. Dr. Delavega still pigeonholed me into housing, and so I do like to look at the built environment when I think about poverty and policy related to that. And I give examples. For instance, the redlining of the early 20th century, which was, and she told me not to include her, the collusion of government, the financial sector, and academia, and keeping people out of what Americans think of as a means to gain wealth through homeownership. And so they said that certain groups of people were risky. Well, in the 40s and 50s, those same maps were almost identical to the interstate highway maps of the Eisenhower era. And so they cut access off from the most basic needs, which we know that shelter and food are our most basic needs as human beings in any civilized society. Just anywhere, whether you're civilized or not, you need shelter and food. And so there are a lot of policy by the federal government, state level government, and even municipal governments that continue poverty. So our zoning policies, for instance, are punitive to inner city development or redevelopment and infill development. So we decided in Memphis particularly that we wanted to become a suburb, a big giant 300 square mile suburb. So that meant everybody has to have a single family house that's detached from someone else and is far away. And we are really particular about our use of private automobiles. We really love them a lot. And so we don't like for people to walk or cycle. And so those things are important because we look at the top 5 costs in different households, but for most of us, whatever our income, it's housing, it's a high cost for us, food, transportation, and it depends on the household. So if you have children, that's education. So especially if it's early childhood and you have families paying upwards of 20% of their gross income, which is already very low, toward childcare costs. And then for senior populations, or because of how we zoned our neighborhoods and cities, medical costs. And I say the zoning related to that because we zone certain places and encourage industry to place there. So that means there are environmental hazards that impact our health. We've cut off access to food, and so we have diet-related disorders. We've cut off access to everything else, primary healthcare services, and other institutions that we all need as human beings. And so I won't go on because I know Elena's about to cut me off, but it's about the built environment and policies related to that continue to cause poverty in our cities and neighborhoods.
Pedro, your turn.
Thank you for the opportunity to the community, you guys. I think that I want to take a little bit different approach in regards to everybody knows that poverty is a complex disease that has predisposing factors. Everybody talk about biological factor, social factor, political factor that impact, and we have a panel of experts. However, this factor define a profile of poverty, and define that risk factor for a population, for a community that is at risk of becoming poverty. What I believe from my medical background is that currently we are focusing and implementing philanthropic resources, political resources, social resources in a pragmatic, in a disrupted way, in a fragmented way that are more aiming to decrease the impact of poverty, when poverty is. Knowing that poverty have a profile, I think that we have been failing, or we have been not working in the preventive approach. Knowing that we have a profile, we are acting in poverty instead of acting in the people at risk to become in poverty. And this is what I think takes different, because once you are in poverty, it's really hard to get out. Once you are in poverty, you already will have life impact.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So for what are you seeing on the ground from MIFA as the barriers that people experience and the barriers that you have for moving people out of poverty?
It's already been stated, but I just want to reiterate it. Basically, to food, particularly to housing, basic necessities that are human rights. If I cannot pay my rent, my mortgage, my utility bill, if I can't put food on the table for my child, then it's very difficult for me to think about basic rights such as education and a livable wage. Also, what we're seeing, because Memphis is third in the nation for senior food insecurity, we're continuing to see seniors. When we go to deliver Meals on Wheels, we see that grandmother not only taking care of her daughter, but her grandchild. So then that goes into another situation of food insecurity for generations, just like we were talking about generational poverty. And also with the home delivered meals program, we are able to see that it's making a difference. However, with the cuts that, we will probably receive after COVID, we're wanting to make sure that the seniors that we've added on do not get off because of a waiting list. And also, as it relates to housing, we have, investors that have come in and actually bought a lot of the affordable housing. And so where we were just seeing what people would consider low income families coming in to our programs that serve families, we're actually seeing more seniors. We're actually seeing more middle income people coming in to receive basic services. And what we found is anytime your rent exceeds 30% of your income, we talk about food insecurity, now we're seeing housing insecurity. We're seeing a new face of homelessness. Again, that's not just situational, but also very generational. And this is a situation that's not just local to Memphis, throughout the state and throughout the nation. So it's imperative that we put safeguards in place, because after these COVID resources and funding that we've received go away, we're looking at a whole different face of poverty and homelessness in our community.
Thank you for that response. Roshun, I really, I'm sorry I'm putting you in housing, but it is such an important component of a person's well-being. And so when you try to provide housing, it's such a basic thing. What are the barriers that you're seeing to get people into housing?
Well, number one, Memphis is experiencing a lack of 40,000 units of affordable housing, and we built 146 last year. So it's going to take forever to do this, and I'll be retired and gone on by the time we get to 40,000. Most of us will. But one of the barriers, and I don't know if people really understand it. So affordable housing, people think of just the rent costs. It is not based on the cost of the rent or the mortgage. It is based on who lives there. And so I like to refocus affordable housing on the people. The people who live in affordable housing, what makes it affordable is that the families are below not necessarily below the poverty level, but they're 80% or below the area's median income. And so that defines affordable housing, the people, not the house. And so we're down 40,000 units in affordable housing because people live in poverty. It costs what it costs. I say bricks and sticks cost the same for me as they do for any other developer. I don't get a discount, unfortunately, on number 2 Pine. And so we saw wood futures go up really high during the pandemic, but I can't pass on the cost of building housing to my end user because they cannot pay more than 30% of their gross, and their gross is really low. And so I have this huge gap of millions of dollars in every housing development that we do, whether it's single family detached housing for home ownership or affordable housing, multifamily affordable housing. And just to give an example, a multifamily development of 146 units, almost $18 million deal. Our gap that we needed to fill with philanthropy was 6.2 million. And so I look, I guess, prosperous, but I don't have 6.2 million for every deal that I do. And so that's one deal. Now I'm set to build 79 units of senior housing across the street from there. So I have a $4.8 million gap. And that doesn't count all of the other developments that I'm doing that have gaps across neighborhoods in Memphis. And so I feel like 27 years into this affordable housing business, it's gotten worse. We are starting to see some change in policy, so I don't have to pay the the Division of Planning and Development $1,000 to request that I am able to use a smaller lot in the inner city because they said all of the lots needed to be really big. And so those policy changes are happening, so that starts to decrease my subsidy need, but not enough.
Not enough. Thank you. I am going to change that a bit for Pedro, because you are so focused on health. So what is the impact that you're seeing of poverty on the health of the people that you see? People who are experiencing these upstream factors that affect their health.
There is recent data from National Institute of Health that demonstrate that the person's health is 25% genetic, 50% dependent on the quality of care, and 60% dependent on the social environment. This data has been proven, and when these social determinants of health are presented in an inequity way at the community level, they become risk factor for acute and chronic conditions, risk factor for premature labor, risk factor for mental illness, risk factor for depression, cardiovascular disease, metabolic infections. So the impact, there is a health impact, quality of life impact, and life expectancy impact. When I've been funded by NIH previously to be a translational researcher, and for the last 17, 20 years, I've been dedicated to develop a model for Memphis. So we developed a model that is called family-centered medical home, that not only provide convenience access to quality care. It's not because I said that it's quality care, it's because we've been ranked, we've been recognized by every single outcome that Medicaid has, every single cut that NCQA have. However, in the model, what made the model is that we integrate social determinants to minimize the impact in patient outcomes and in financial outcomes. For instance, transportation, 35% of our visits are simultaneous visits. For instance, food insecurity, twice a week, every time that a patient goes to the clinic, they will get 40 pounds of healthy options of food. Fragmentation of care. We have every provider, primary care, cardiology, endo, eye clinic under one roof that work together. So those things are being integrated in a self-sustaining model that allow us to provide a high quality care and minimize the impact of those social determinants.
And that impact results in worse health for people in poverty.
It is, but it's exactly what I said. 60% of who you are and health related depend on your social environment.
Mm-hmm. So what do we do about it? And so, well, it's a bad problem. We know it's a bad problem. We've lived with it. So, Arnetta, what is that you would like to see in terms of supports and structures that would move people out forward?
Well, one thing we've done in terms of support is that we actually have surveyed some of our clients and asked them, what do they think that they need? And one thing that they have said is it's too much paper and they have to go to too many agencies to receive services. So one thing the pandemic did is allowed us to collaborate with our partners, have more streamlined services, collaborate with more one-stop shops, like the Aging Commission of the Mid-South is like the one-stop shop for seniors. And also in terms of tracking and referrals, So everybody will know who's going where. We work with Co-Action Net, which has been very instrumental in helping with referrals and tracking. And so we listened to our clients during the pandemic. Obviously, there were issues regarding people coming into the building. So we now have both online and in-person opportunities. And then before I left today, somebody's like, well, your computer system's not working. Well, we have a hotline that you can call. So again, we're trying to be responsive, and that support to us is important as we continue to serve the community. And also, as it relates to food insecurity, advocacy is so critical. Food is medicine. Regulations would be great, particularly for Meals on Wheels to be fully reimbursed from a Medicare perspective. And also increasing Older Americans Act funding. Again, we get all of this funding when something bad happens. We want it to continue. As well as SNAP and other programs, and also incentives to giving to nonprofits, as well as volunteers. Volunteers play a critical role in all of our programming, and so any legislation that can support that is really greatly appreciated. As it relates to housing insecurity, improving our housing voucher system, as well as social versus public housing, where, again, it's not like Roshun said, just based on income, but what do you have? And is there an opportunity for those who can afford market rate to offset the cost of those who cannot?
Thank you. And for Roshun, I think that a very similar question. What are the things, the policy changes and supports that you would need that would facilitate your work in creating a better environment for all members of the community?
Yeah, so definitely policy, and I could, like you can go on about poverty, I can go on about policy and what needs to change. And of course, I do built environment work, so zoning policy needs to change. And our organization is pretty disruptive. If I were to dream of a community, and I don't necessarily want to be Collierville, but I dream of lifetime fitness communities, and I'll explain that. That's my business side. Lifetime has a model, and most retailers have a model. Every retailer has a model. And I tell people in communities, Walgreens sits at a corner. The buildings look identical. They set up their stores identically, and they're looking at the population and the number of cars that drive down that road or visitors to Walgreens. And so Lifetime has a similar model. So it's placed in Collierville. And if I go to Houston's Lifetime, Dallas's Lifetime, Chicago's Lifetime, the income level, the families that live there are almost identical to Memphis's Collierville's Lifetime Fitness, so the Memphis area. And so all our communities need to meet all of the social and physical needs of every community member, regardless of their income. It's the Lifetime Fitness model. And I'd like to see that replicated, but that means we need to eliminate barriers, and a lot of it driven by policy in those other neighborhoods. And I just have to say this, so because housing is just one part of where we all live. I look at my neighborhood. I live not far in Evergreen now, and I didn't always live in Evergreen, but I walk every morning to a park that we all share at Overton Park. And I walk straight down Overton Park, and I'm next to a museum. There is a Rainbow Lake. There's a playground. There are trees. There's sidewalk. I feel safe. There is nice housing. And I sent my staff over to Evergreen when we were looking at a subdivision in South Memphis. I said, what do you see in Evergreen? And I'm not a planner, I'm an anthropologist, but I see fourplexes or quadruplexes mixed in with single family. I see garage apartments, and zoning doesn't allow me to do that today in South Memphis, but it was allowed in Evergreen. And so you have families who were able to build wealth, or they were able to have mother-in-law in the back, and they have families that could live together. But I'm kind of stuck, not able to build a single family, or I have to pay to build a quadruplex, or I have to pay to, and there are some of those big houses along Stonewall that have 8 units. And so I like to think practically and look at how Evergreen is built as compared to other neighborhoods in the city. And I'm an Evergreen person, so I'm not anti my neighborhood, but I like for our neighborhoods, all neighborhoods, to have either a lifetime model or they look like evergreen. And I can go to Tonica or Echo, or I can go to Cash Saver. I can go so Fresh Market, very close, and I can cycle. So I can ride my bike and I feel safe. I have bike lanes. I can walk, so we just need to meet all of the social and physical needs of all of the members of our communities.
Yep. Thank you. I do have a couple follow-up questions for the two of you, but I want to hear Pedro first talk about what you see as the supports that you would need to be able to help more people and to help the people that you serve achieve their health goals.
I think that there is a need for everybody. When I mean everybody, I mean health manager organization, universities, hospital, community developer, to understand that health is a broad condition, that 75% is driven by the access, by the quality of care that you receive, by the social environment that the community that you live on, okay? So ideally, I think that if we see what is reflected in our cost of health, we can see that the current system is favoring treatment of diseases, is making a lot of procedures, making a hospital-based approach, and it's easier to treat complications than prevent complications. Even though we know that healthy people is less costly and more productive. Mm-hmm. And ideally, what we need to embrace are a more preventive approach with the resources and be sure that this philanthropic, this financial, this political situation go to more preventive approach to any level, health promotion at any level, educational level, healthcare level, and housing level, every environment component. So I think that it's the way that the system works that is affecting where are we putting our resources and what we need to embrace is a little bit distorted. Okay, so as a physician, I love to see prevention. I love to see working on people at risk more than treating people that is already sick, calling sick poverty or health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, prevention is a lot cheaper.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. So I do have a follow-up question for Arnetta. And you talked about how people are not really receiving the financial supports that they need. So can you explain a little bit more about what policy barriers are in place so that people cannot get SNAP or other supports like that you see?
Right. So for one thing, education. A lot of the seniors, and that's what we tell them, we have these volunteers and staff going out. I think they don't even understand sometimes what their opportunities are. So I think education is key to communicating to not only seniors, but the community at large, what exactly is out there to support them. That's a huge barrier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for Roshun, what you described made me think of the research that James Jacobs did in 1960, the death of the Great American City. And one of the things that you talk about is this integration, people living together. Can you expand a little bit on that and how that would create a better community?
Well, we did this experiment in America called public housing. And so we isolated extremely poor families in one place. It was a bad experiment. And I started out as a biochemist, was not great. And so our communities, the best communities have, and then you have people that are NIMBYs, renters, homeowners, and homeowners at different level, people who have low income, and ideally in a perfect world, people would not in America, in the wealthiest nation in the world, live at or below poverty. But I'm idealistic, and I know that's probably not going to happen in my lifetime. And if I think of even my biblical background, the poor will be amongst us always. But the healthiest communities have all different types of people, whether that's ethnic, income, children, seniors, families, different types of families. It's not segregated in one type of person. That's not how we exist as humans. And the part of me that Elena doesn't talk about is, now we're into growing trees and pollinators. And I've learned some words because I'm not an agronomist. I just play one on TV. And so we have one on our staff now. But I think about, and I'm going to use my word, regenerative. And so we've thought about using, and we use it in community development all of the time, sustainable. And I was at a tree conference in California. Don't ask me why. I know a lot about emerald ash borers. I can talk about that later over drinks. But one of the scientists talked about the words sustainable versus regenerative. And I never thought about it. We always talk about sustainable, and I never asked the definition. It just means maintaining without degrading. Well, we can't maintain without degrading things that we've already not invested in. So we don't want to maintain communities that have been split by interstates, maintain communities that don't have access. We shouldn't be saying sustainable. So I'm trying to move our industry to saying regenerative. Is very hard to say, even for me. So I'm not Mexican, but it's a difficult word. It means that you're looking at natural systems and how they operate today, and you're trying to bring them to improve productivity. And so why are we saying sustainable if we're maintaining things that are bad policy? We should be using the word regenerative so that we're improving on things that we've done poorly. I mean, segregating poor people, cutting off their access. And then I think as humans, we're better if we're with people that are not just like us. When they, it doesn't matter what your background, whether you're educated, in an institution, and the colleges even know better. They're seeking diverse student populations, the best colleges. And I will shout out my college, Middlebury College. So they were always seeking, and I recruit for them. So if you have children or grandchildren, they were seeking, they were trying to be perfect with it, male, female, and now non-binary, or based on your race or ethnicity, whatever your identity. And so the college wanted not a boring school that, made up of robots that were all straight A students who I tell kids when I interview them, they're like, well, I'm a straight A student and I'm a nerd and I'm a nerd. And I'm like, you're so boring. The college wants something other than all of the straight A nerds. We need some kids that may be some C students that are creatives, that are interesting. And I don't mean to offend them, but I think our society needs to look that same way. We need all types of people to survive as humans. We're not androids or Spock.
Thank you for that. That is exactly on point. And for Pedro, you had mentioned that there are certain policies that are making healthcare difficult. Can you mention some of those?
Policy-wise, even it's policy, the way that the reimbursement of the system goes. We get, for instance, reimbursed at any level, is Medicaid or Medicaid for the amount of service that we do. So it's something embracing overuse of the system, overuse of the service. We get policies that foster, shift more resources to treat diseases and to prevent diseases. Mm-hmm. You can see that we have one of the most, probably number one cause of care in the world.
Yeah.
And we don't have the best outcome. So this is 99% policy.
Yeah.
Because this is exactly, and as you can see, the impact of these policies is what is driving the medicine now. You can see that not many physicians want to become preventive physicians because they don't make enough money. They don't have enough opportunity to impact the people or to live a normal, high standard, even though they went to this semi-university. Most of the physicians now are pro-procedure, pro-admission. Hospital has the power to hire them, and all of this is regulated by policies. The way the university relates with the hospital, the way the university produce providers only to work, or mainly to work in hospital, is something that can be addressed in different ways. We are not training our physician in becoming preventive. We are not training our physician in becoming managing risk factors. We are treating our physician and providers and treating diseases that sometimes it's too late. It's like treating poverty. It's hard. Once you are sick, you will be sick.
Yep, prevention is way better.
You're sick.
By far.
That is so true.
So to finish my portion and my questions, I would like to ask each of you to answer the same question. And it's this. If you had a magic wand and you could do something, one thing, you don't get to have a lot of wishes, you get to have one wish. To solve this problem of poverty, what would you do? And Arnetta, you go first.
Okay, so you know how we had all of these lines for people who wanted to get vaccinated for COVID? So there would be this shot, and this shot would actually have, and it'd be lines of people, everybody's going to have to give it, and everybody would start off in the shot would have actual access, equal access to basic necessities such as food and housing. And then, you know, this whole analogy of the road, you know, we're using a road map, you know, as our analogy even for the topic today. And as opposed to everybody would have the same vehicle, as opposed to some people having crutches and some people, you know, having Cadillacs. Everybody, and this is all this shot, you get this, like we've been lined up, right?
I did say magic wand.
It's a magic wand. And then all of that would go into that one shot, and everybody would have an equal playing field and access to the basic necessities of life.
Yeah, I want that too.
There you go. So,
Roshun.
I'm not going to stick you. But my dream is very similar in Dr. Robinson, sorry, but I play a preacher on TV. And so similar in Judaism, I found that, and this is my TED Talk all over and again. I'm going to keep repeating it over and over again. So until people get it, that I want all of the basic things. It requires that the teacher live in a place that has 10 basic things. And we don't want blood letters, but we do want Pedro. So we want access to health. We want sewer. We want educational institutions. So I want to keep building my lifetime communities over and over again with a lot of hardwoods and pollinators and food if I want to grow it, and access to the grocery store if I don't want to grow it, not packaged, no high fructose corn syrup, parks and housing that is quality and affordable for everyone, regardless of their income.
Okay. I'm going to follow similar line of prevention. I think that my dream is that people with resources and people with decision-making power will be able to understand better the complexity of poverty and understand better the predisposing factors so they can apply those resources, those capacity to impact community early and prevent communities and people to become in poverty. It's important that investing in when the people is in poverty probably won't impact neither the progression nor will solve the problem. So ideally, I insist that the bigger knowledge and understanding of the complexity, bigger understanding what predisposes people to become in poverty will be a better place to add and dedicate resources and power and strategies.
Thank you very much. So what we've heard tonight is that there are a lot of barriers that keep and put people in poverty, but a lot of these barriers have a name: lack of access, lack of prevention, and exclusion. Not having a community that is for everyone, not having a community in which everyone has access to the same healthy activities, healthy foods, healthy opportunities, prevention. And we're trying to cure this terrible, terrible problem when we're already mired in it. And it's going to be so hard to pull ourselves out of it because we haven't done the preventative things. And the other thing we heard again and again is how policy can create barriers and can also remove barriers, can serve as a mechanism for exclusion or can serve as a mechanism for inclusion and for prevention. So I think that starting this roadmap as looking at policy, looking at inclusion, and whenever possible, trying to have prevention rather than cure. But I would like now to invite people to ask questions. If you don't want to ask questions, I can keep asking questions. So, who do you want to ask?
I just, anyone. I was just gonna ask if there are any examples of other cities or maybe other even smaller communities that have overcome similar challenges. Because I know like Momentum, Bay Area is very fortunate, so it's easier to have momentum and have good policy there. But what about other areas and how have they overcome those challenges that we can maybe learn from?
So the question is, can you provide any examples of any cities that have implemented policies that have been effective in eliminating poverty or reducing it? Who would like to answer that, since we didn't get a questioner?
It's pretty spotty. And so they get one thing right and 10 things wrong. And so it'll be a policy like Massachusetts has a housing court, but then they have some other issues. And then Cleveland has some policies that deal with vacant and abandoned properties, but then they have a ton of other issues. And so there is not one place, this utopia, that has gotten it all right. I think there are examples of smaller communities within cities that are making attempts. And I think we are leaders across the country in Memphis. And sometimes we always look outside and are looking at what other people have done. But we have great nonprofits here, including the ones I'm sitting with, that have worked together. We had a great meeting yesterday to talk about access, food access. And so we just need to do a better job of piecing together. Everybody plays a different role. We don't all do the same things. And so I think we will be the example for the US if we can get agencies to work together like we are doing now.
And to complement what Roshun said is that examples, we can get an example in specific areas, housing, food insecurity. But as you can see, when you are in poverty, that already people is in poverty, there is too many needs. So probably what we should be concerned is how we can develop an example for the rest of the country. So we can integrate. I'm a traditional physician that working with the new generation, I found out better ways. So the model of healthcare that we are developing is no longer into the clinic. We are opening 5 school healthcare systems. We are providing food in those school systems. When patients come to drop the kid, they can pick up some food. They come to the clinic, they can pick up some food. They go to the clinic, they can see the pharmacy, they can see the primary care, they can see the specialist. So we need to come out with a model that will fix Memphis' need. And in my experience in healthcare, when I worked for the university 12 years, and we tried to implement solutions, and I tried to bring solutions from California. I did my training in Boston. Let's see what we did in Boston. Guess what? It didn't apply to Memphis. Memphis have a unique way to see things and act in things that we need to understand better. So what we did was characterize Memphis. So for the last 17 years, we've been collecting information systematically in Memphis. We've been analyzing, and the model of care that we do is totally different than it was 7 years ago, 5 years ago. It's kept evolving. It's a dynamic model that is applied to the new Memphis, when I came here 27 years ago, downtown wasn't like it is. So there was another need. So ideally, my proposal for this is that we develop an integrated dynamic aspect that is not just the food aspect, it's not just the housing aspect, everybody has to have different approach and a different aspect of the pie.
And 38126 is an example. I mentioned 38126 because it's one of the poorest zip codes, in Memphis. And there have been various foundations and organizations who've targeted that area, and they are seeing successes. So I think, as opposed to comparing us with others, and it's great to get best practices, we all do that. But I do believe that Memphis, again, because it's such generational poverty in our community, that one zip code at a time is a good approach to actually be able to see that we're moving the needle.
Unique Memphis. I'm gonna get the gentleman in the back in the black shirt.
Thank you.
And who would you like to ask?
I would like to ask Ms. Austin about, in these communities that you're developing, are you gathering evidence to demonstrate the shift in lifestyle and in health among the residents and the improvement in those areas of their lives that you can then demonstrate to say, hey, this is a way to not just improve outcomes, but improve an entire community and beyond?
Yes, we are. We are very outcome based, and so if as a landlord, for instance, I'm looking at the whole person. I don't just want a tenant that can pay me rent. I want to eliminate the barriers, and so if I look at like one program, our cooking education, we do a pre and a post survey. So we want to see that their food budget is maximized, they minimize waste, and so that means we're composting, we're thinking about food waste, but we're also wanting them to eat healthier. So what are the outcomes? They reduce their medication usage, they move from using the emergency room to preventative care, they lose weight, and then we get them involved in our cycling program. We get the seniors out and they start their own walking group. They control it. I'm not in control of them. I'm not even going to try. So we are measuring a lot of different outcomes, and even working with scientists at the University of Memphis and other institutions, what is happening in the environment when we plant trees, what's happening in the larger community when we build a park. And so that's why I said I'm not just housing. Then what happened even in this, not far from here in Washington Bottoms, we're experimenting. We don't own that land. When we look at how we treat vacant properties, how does it impact not just that area? How can we implement that across the city, and how the city and county deal with vacant and abandoned properties? And so we are measuring all of the time. We were, along with MIFA and other agencies, we did the legal assistance for the emergency rental assistance program. And so we have tons and tons of data to show if we prevented an eviction, what happened to the family, or what happened to a family if they experience eviction. And so every program area, and we have a lot, and I have cards to talk about them, we measure, and then we cross measure across programs.
However, it is important to see that those positive change has been coming in most of the city, but there is silence that we haven't been able to get. When we start Black Dog as a model in Healthy Memphis Common Table, Memphis was the second unhealthy place to live in America. Now we can see that there is 5,000 bike rides a day. That we are number one in CrossFit or number two in CrossFit in America. However, there is siloed areas that we haven't because of the segregation, because of the fragmentation. We can see that especially the younger people are still really sick. We just finished a project in characterizing the impact of adiposity, obesity in adolescents. I choose adolescent because this is the next generation of adult. Okay, then 4 years they will be adult. Guess what? There is data that show that we need to move a faster pace because in this we characterize almost 3,000 adolescents, 12 to 17 years. 20% of those adolescents with a mean age of 30 years have elevated high blood pressure or hypertension. 80% have diabetes or prediabetes. 34% have 3 cardiovascular risk factors or more at age 13. So even though we are making improvement in areas, we need to make effort to move faster because we won't be able to catch up with all the consequences of poverty, with social inequities, because they are moving faster than we are moving with a solution.
And I'm going to get the lady in the gray sweater. Hello.
I'm glad you said that, Dr. Pedro, because my question is centered around, a lot of what was talked about tonight was the policy, but we know in America, policies can take years and years and years to change. So what are the current actionables? What are the small steps that other organizations that are doing the same kinds of things you guys are doing, maybe on a smaller scale, but what are those action items that we can be moving towards now in order to start seeing the change now?
I can make a suggestion that one of the actions is an integrated approach to whatever you do. If you want to do something in housing and you forget about food insecurity, you forget about health environment, job environment, it's never going to get it. Whatever you're going to impact, even in a small school, in a small workplace, try to see integrated approach and try to identify people earlier at risk more than the one that is already impacted. It's not because you will be able to prevent complication of this, but actually the impact in the epidemic will be of poverty, of health impact is going to be easier and less costly when you do integrated early in life. This is my opinion.
Yeah, the last thing I want to see is nonprofits who don't do something try to do it. So I agree that it needs to be integrated and not siloed. But if they know that's an issue for a family and they don't know how to do it, then they need to partner. I don't want to be MIFA. I'm not going to be Pedro. I'm not going to be United Way. I'm not going to be some other nonprofit. We all need to figure out how do we join forces and stop fighting over what we think are very limited resources. But I think there are some policies that don't take years. I read and I was very frustrated that the county commission delayed looking at the zoning ordinance for 3 weeks, but they're talking about some random stuff that doesn't make sense. Why are you delaying looking at the zoning ordinance, which you can change this year in 3 readings? And so it doesn't always take a long time. And so be loud and disruptive like me and tell them to do their jobs and change those ordinances that have prevented us from developing in communities across Memphis and, you know, perpetuating poverty into the next generation. And so we can do that policy at a municipal level today. They just delayed it for whatever dumb reason.
One more question. And gentleman, raise his hand.
Yes, this is more of a comment, but I might have a question at the end. I hear a unifying visionary thing from all of you, in that all of these things have to do with the social determinants of health, for one thing. And integrative, I like the word integrative, I like the word sustainable, I like even better the word regenerative. So I divide things into needs and wants. And in our country, we commoditize everything, and we shouldn't be commoditizing
Housing,
needs.
yeah.
Needs should be just as, I'm sorry, I'm
Roshun.
But anyway, but you said needs should be provided under a social justice and a social program, and not under a, I don't want to use the word capitalism, I want to use the word free market. You know, free markets do wonderful, wonderful things to our country. They've given us cars that cost $35,000. You know, we don't need a car, we need transportation. So computers, I can buy a computer that can do all these wondrous things for me, calculations and other things, for almost nothing. And so the point I'm trying to make is when it comes to policy changes, political feasibility, if you could address the issue of political feasibility, because a lot of the things, particularly in healthcare, that we need, like universal healthcare, you could address the feasibility, political feasibility of this vision that you painted of how to address poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that beautiful comment. I think that it does take political will in the people in this room. Then I will now go
and see how we are integrating many of the things that you were talking about.
Invited us
How we move to
to
the school,
talk
how we
about
impact
this
school, how we
important
impact
topic
food
that is so
insecurity.
close to my heart.
So let's give a hand to everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Stanton. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at the Community Foundation, and we just want to thank you all for coming tonight. We literally had to cut off registrations due to interest in this event. We've got a lot of people walking online, so thank you for your time. We created this event with feedback from you, from our donors, from our Get 365 members, from our committee members, and from other friends in the community. So this conversation is meant to be the first in a series diving into the drivers of poverty, the social determinants of health, and how we as a community can find ways to use our time, talent, and treasure to start addressing some of these issues and these root causes in this community. We have several other events planned this year, and we hope you'll stay engaged with us as we move forward. But as you leave tonight, we ask you to think about what else you would like to hear about from us, what else we can bring to the table, who you want to hear about, what you want to know about that you may not have answers to. So as you're leaving, tell Bob or Veronica or Caroline, or you can tell me that I'm the worst memory of everybody here, so tell somebody back there, so we can continue to bring you the content that you guys want, so that we can connect you with the people that you want to hear from, because that's what we're here for, and that's what we want to continue to be here for. So thank you again to our panelists tonight, who were awesome, and thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.